On this episode of the Riz Khan Show, we mark an unhappy anniversary. 1 year after October the 7th, tens of thousands of Palestinians are dead, hundreds of thousands displaced, while Israelis mourn their own dead and plead for the return of the hostages. We'll look back on the Israel-Gaza war through the eyes of people whose lives have been forever changed. There are plenty of people walking around Washington, D.C. who owe their lives to my next guest. Tariq Haddad is a Palestinian American who has saved countless patients through his work as a cardiologist. But he's been helpless to save more than 175 members of his own family who have lost their lives during the Israeli military operation in Gaza. He turned down an offer to meet the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken as he considered the 3-minute appointment inadequate to address his outrage. Dr. Haddad and I sat down for a conversation at his home in Virginia. Dr. Haddad, thanks for making the time. I know this is not an easy conversation, but I'm glad you could at least give us the time for it. Let's start by painting a picture of your early life, your experiences of Gaza as a child.
So I thank you for having me. I grew up in Gaza, so from the time I was a few months old. Most of my formative youth, my memories are just the beauty of Gaza, the people, I grew up in my grandmother's home. So my parents moved there when I was 3 months old in Khan Yunis. We lived there among, my very large extended family. The entire street actually is all our family and our extended family. My memories growing up, were several things. So of course, a lot of happiness in terms of, my family, beautiful, beautiful people. Palestinians just are warm, incredibly giving people. But, there's a lot of memories of just living under occupation. And that even as a child, not understanding the history or anything, it was very formative in my life. Just growing up with very little water, very little electricity. If I took a long shower, there wasn't enough water for everybody else to cook with. Memories like that. Lots of violence, growing up under violence. It's just a fact of life as a Palestinian.
Which also is one of the reasons there are such big extended families. Everyone's quite closely bonded under those circumstances, aren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's, there's no family member who has not been affected in some way, shape, or form by violence. Every one of my cousins has either been, jailed, been hit, been affected in some way by the Israeli occupation. I myself was shot at multiple times by rubber bullets playing chess in the street with my cousins. This was when I was around 13 years old. It's just a fact of life, and like you said, family and the bond of family among Palestinians is what kind of keeps you together under these very, very trying circumstances.
How did your journey take you from Gaza to Virginia here in the USA, where you're just like 20 minutes from the White House and the State Department?
Palestinians, one of the things people don't know a lot about Palestinians is because so much of our life is controlled by others. The occupation, having, food and water and electricity and everything around you, your laws, everything's controlled. And so one of the only things that we have control over to the best of our ability is education. And it's a huge value among Palestinians on education. And so, my parents always, really made that incumbent upon us. And I thankfully, thanks to my parents, had a wonderful education. I was able to eventually come to the United States for my high school years, and then went to Duke University for college, went on to medical school, and my medical training thereafter in the United States.
How easy was it to stay in touch with your extended family once you were based here in the U.S.?
It was extremely difficult. So I tried, before I started my medical training, I would go back as much as I could every summer whenever I was able to. The problem is that because of the, once it got to around 2005, 2006, and the Israeli blockade on Gaza started, the border with Gaza was closed, was only open on average 4 days a month. And so when when somebody's in their medical training and, it's very difficult to be able to go back there and knowing I could get essentially, trapped in there for months on end. So it's very difficult. But we still, my family is always in my minds, and we talk all the time, all my family over there. So,
as you and I sit here, today is actually the anniversary of the Hamas attacks of October the 7th, 2023. What do you recall of hearing about that when it happened, and what went through your head as an American, as a Palestinian, as a doctor?
I think it was a difficult day. I believe, and every Palestinian I know believes, that every human life is valuable, and it doesn't matter. I don't put any credence to any difference among people, among religion. It's all equal, and any loss of human life, innocent life, is a tragedy to me. Both the loss of innocent lives on October 7th, and of course the 45,000 Palestinians who've been killed since. And all the thousands and thousands of Palestinians that have been killed before that. It's all, to me, unnecessary and tragic, in my opinion.
Certainly in the Western narrative, discussing that attack in a very diverse way has become difficult. And it's described as the next Holocaust and so on. But you as a Palestinian, when you heard about the extent of this attack by Hamas and the other groups that joined them, what went through your head? Was it kind of inevitable?
I don't ascribe to any loss of innocent civilians as being inevitable. Having said that, seeing the incredible suffering the Palestinian people have gone through from the time I was born in the early 70s until now, and even before that, for 75 years, and then seeing the incredible suffering my family has been under, even during the blockade. Since the mid-2000s, they've lived on average with 4 hours of electricity a day. They've lived with, water that's literally under the WHO, World Health Organization, minimum standards for what people should have. They've lived under, inability to go in and out, to go places, incredible conditions that restricted any freedom of movement, any freedom, any ability to live. And I think, people living under those circumstances, under desperation, with, rates of poverty exceeding any in the world, for the most part, there's going to be desperation. There's going to be desperation, and I think, sadly, I think violence gets bred out of that sort of situation. Because Palestinians have been living under this violence for 75 years, and it's very sad. The whole thing is sad, but I think you have to understand it within the context of all the incredible violence that Palestinians have lived under for so many years.
When it happened, what thoughts did you have about the possible repercussions it would have on your family, the risks it presented?
Oh, I knew immediately. I've dealt with collective punishment in my family for years. The year my youngest son was born, 10 of my family members were killed, including small children, in 2014. And this was Israeli attacks on Gaza, and these were little children who were running in the street. So I've lived with this for years, and I knew this would lead to a lot of death of civilians, and I knew right away. I don't think I had any idea the tragic lengths to which it went, and the way that it affected my family and the family of every person in Gaza.
When you heard about the attack a year ago, then when did you then start to hear about what was happening to your family members? When the losses started from that?
Oh, it's within a few days. The attack started almost immediately, and I would say by mid-October we were starting to see casualties in my family and deaths, and homes being destroyed, and then they just really started to mount. And most of my family on my mom's side is in Khan Yunis. Most of my family on my father's side is in Gaza. So they were getting it on both sides. And it's at this point, we've almost lost track of how many deaths in my family, but it's been well over, at this point, 175 people in my family who've been killed. And it's just been a steady stream. It started in mid-October, and it hasn't stopped since.
Dr. Hanad, one of the problems with discussing the numbers of people killed, the statistic is that it starts to cloud what are the actual individual stories, the people, the human beings behind those numbers. And that's obviously now evident more so than ever with you and your story. So let's talk about the members of the families that you've lost. And I know it's a difficult conversation, but tell me about some of them. So, you know, who they were and what happened.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, the past year has been a collective nightmare for my family. You know, there's too many to list, and that's the sad part. But just some of the stories that come to mind, just dozens and dozens of children. You know, there's an infant, Sabir, who died in December in the middle of the tents in Rafah after his house had been destroyed, and he died after his father had been killed, all of his siblings had been killed. And his mother had been killed. He was orphaned, and he died from hypothermia in the middle of December. A child who was literally a few days old, and he died from hypothermia, completely unnecessary, having had his home destroyed and all of his family destroyed. Another child from my mom's side of the family, Hamza, who he and his parents and his uncle and aunt and his other uncle and his grandparents all lived in one home. One Israeli missile attack in Khan Yunis on October 25th killed 16 members of his family. Hamza was barely 10 years old, okay, and he survived. He's the only one of his family. He survived. He woke up in a hospital with an amputation and with the news that his parents, his uncle, his aunt, his other uncle, his grandparents, every single member of his family had been killed. And then he himself succumbed to the trauma from his amputation. I just wish your listeners could understand what it would be like. You know, just take Palestinian or Israeli out of this, and just imagine if you were a 10-year-old kid, every single member of your family has been killed, and you wake up in a hospital with an amputation for no reason. You're a child. Another family member of mine from my mother's side of the family, Tuqa, who was killed on her wedding day. Imagine being killed on your wedding day. She was killed with 9 other members of her family on the day of her wedding. Another cousin of mine, Dan Al-Farra, who was killed while she was pregnant. Another was killed on the day she got her PhD while she was sheltering in Rafah. My first cousin from my father's side, Hani, was killed with his mother. He survived initially to find his mother buried from the waist up in the rubble of their home, dead, along with his brother. He managed to survive with a fairly minor leg injury and bled to death the next day because there was no hospitals near his home. In Gaza, every hospital had been destroyed. He died from a completely preventable wound. I mean, the stories go on, and they just continue month after month. Just recently in August, one of my cousins, Abdullah, was going to get bread for his family. His family was hungry. He just went in Khan Yunis just to wherever he could get bread. He had one bag of bread in each of his hands. And he was walking back to his home, and an Israeli missile hit him and killed him. And our last picture of him was him dead on the side of the road with a bag of bread in each hand. Just recently, about 4 or 5 days ago, another large segment of my mother's side of the family, 23 family members, all killed in a strike that was massive, absolutely destroyed. I think I provided you some video, but it's destroyed literally what looks like the equivalent of a New York City block. And it was 9 stories, and numerous families all killed, 23 members of my family. So yeah, numbers don't really tell the story. It's all these human stories. These are all innocent people. These are all members of my family that either I know or my uncles or my aunts know. They're beautiful people, pharmacists, physicians, children, PhD candidates, brides on their wedding day, interior decorators, a journalist, stories. I mean, these are people like any of us. And sadly, I feel like one of the things as a Palestinian we've learned this year is how much we are dehumanized. We're not really looked at as people, just numbers. And I think their stories need to be heard.
That missile attack to which you just referred actually happened very recently.
Yes.
And it means that you're having to keep a toll, and that toll just continues.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
It's incredibly difficult. We keep a record of it to honor them because they are beautiful people, and I don't want them to have died in vain. And it's and I believe we owe it to them. But yes, it has a toll. And my uncle, we do a lot of different projects to help over there. And one of my uncles does a beautiful thing. He literally keeps track of every single family member who needs something, and it's a list that's, it goes on. And he literally physically writes down every single family he's given supplies to, food to, something to, because we need to honor people. We need to do what we can under incredibly difficult circumstances.
You work as a cardiologist. You save the lives of people, irrespective of race, religion, color, or anything. And you've still been powerless to be able to help your family in any way over there in Gaza. How has what you've witnessed and how you are still witnessing, or what you're still witnessing, how has that affected your own personal relationship with, what is the value of life, your relationship with life and death?
It's difficult. I mean, like you said, as a physician, I treat everybody equally. I always have, always will. The lack of respect for basic human life that's happened over the past year, it really makes it difficult as a physician. And it's really hard when, so much, as a cardiologist who works on prevention, I talk so much about what you can do to prevent something as opposed to just treating it on the back end. And so much of what's happening is preventable. And it's extremely difficult. When I have to hear statistics like 4 hours of water a day, or 4 hours of electricity a day, when I have to hear things like water that's below the WHO minimum, when I have to hear that, most medications, there's not enough supply for essential medications in Gaza. That's the vast majority. When I have to hear things like, the vast majority of children in Gaza suffer from PTSD, that the most common complaint that brings on PTSD in them is the sound of missile fire. I mean, can you imagine, knowing as a physician all the stuff that's preventable? My own cousin, who's now in the United States, to this day, it is very hard for us to go to a fireworks show because he grew up in Gaza when he was a child. And every time he hears fireworks, it makes him wince because he grew up the only thing he remembers about that sound is bombs.
As a Palestinian American living in the USA, how do you react and how do you feel when the US continues to reaffirm its support for Israel, its continued supplying of weapons to Israel that is actually responsible for the deaths that your family and thousands, tens of thousands of others are enduring?
It's extremely, extremely difficult. I don't necessarily, delve into the political world, but when we as a country, when our tax dollars, when money that, citizens are working for, and that money is going directly, not to a country, it's not about whether it's going to a country or not, but it's going directly towards the killing of over 45,000 people, directly. I mean, imagine if you were in my shoes and every single time you heard about a family member being killed. And I quite literally have family on the ground telling me, yep, U.S. bombs. We can see the jets, we can see the bombs, we can see exactly what's happening. And I know that that's quite literally, money coming out of my pocket, that's going towards these weapons. It's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult.
So what goes through your head when you hear Israel and the US backing its perspective that it's targeting Hamas fighters who are hiding using civilians as human shields?
Well, since I know most of the family of my family that have been killed, and I know the circumstances, and I quite literally have the videos showing what's happening, and I know these beautiful people, I'm incredulous. That's the only way I can say it. You explain to me how children, getting bags of bread, in the street with nobody around them represents a human shield. You tell me how, a family of mine of 16 people, 3 generations, all living in one home, and beautiful people, including somebody on their wedding day. How in God's name is that representing a human shield? How is a child, who freezes to death as an infant, a human shield? It's very difficult for me to hear these things when the facts on the ground that I'm seeing as a human being, not in the press, but as somebody who has family there. It's very, very difficult to swallow and to grasp this.
You were among a group of Palestinian Americans invited by the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to go to the State Department, just 8 miles from you here, to go and have a discussion with them, and you declined. Now, some would say that was the perfect opportunity to express your anger, to express your frustration. What made you decide not to go?
So I think the context of what happened, so this was in early February, so the context I think is important. So at that time, the United States at that time, under the leadership of both President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken, had already, sent billions of dollars in aid and released weapons from our strategic military reserve in the Middle East directly towards these attacks and towards the killing of my own family. And literally just a couple of days before this meeting was supposed to happen and this invitation happened, the United States had also decided to withdraw aid from the only major organization that's supplying any aid to the Palestinians in Gaza, which is the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. And so I get this invitation. We want a roundtable, and with Palestinian leaders, and actions speak louder than words. And I found it very hard to believe that anything other than political grandstanding was to be accomplished by meeting with the Secretary of State, when every single action on the ground that he had shown was that he had absolutely no regard for Palestinian life. Zero. I just wasn't going to be, part of a group that was going to be used for political grandstanding. If you want to show that you value all human life, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnicity, I'll be happy to meet with you and talk to you about my views. But if you can't even bring yourself to recognize the importance of all human life, I'm not going to be used for political grandstanding.
So you wrote a 12-page letter that I understand was read out to Antony Blinken.
Yes.
And I know it was quite moving in many places. I'm wondering if you could just actually read out some of that statement to me so we get a sense of it, please.
Sure, yeah, no problem. This was read specifically to Antony Blinken at this round table, and I had a staffer actually print it out for him. So this was the portion that I had read to Secretary of State Blinken. Thank you for the invitation to the roundtable scheduled for today on the Gaza genocide. While I initially submitted an RSVP to attend later today, after a lot of soul searching, I've decided that I cannot in good conscience meet with you today, knowing this administration is possible. How does one meet for what I was told would be 3 minutes with a person you hold responsible for not just the killing of your child, but rather the murder of over 80 of your family members? How do I say in 3 minutes to somebody who will forever in history be known for actively aiding and abetting one of the worst genocides in a century, what that person's actions have done, my family's suffering, and that of my people? How do I look a person in the eyes for 3 minutes who not only could have prevented the death of my 85 family members and the nearly 15,000 children in Gaza who've been killed, but actively contributed to their suffering and death by providing military ammunitions from our U.S. military supply to kill my family and destroy their homes? How do I look you in the eyes knowing you couldn't even do the basic minimum, like calling for a ceasefire to end the suffering and the carnage, and even worse, are cutting off humanitarian assistance to 2 million people going through a famine of historic proportions? My family are subsisting on animal feed, Secretary Blinken, because of your policies.
And of course, the death toll has gone up since then.
Yes.
Did you get any feedback, any response from Secretary Blinken?
I was told by people, the staffer who was there, and some people, that he stayed cold-faced the entire time as this letter was read to him. No response, and I did not get a personal response either.
As an American voter, Do you have any interest in supporting any of the candidates or any of the governments with the way things are going for the U.S. election now?
I mean, right now, the person that I'm probably going to vote for is Jill Stein. I have no ability to vote, for a government right now that, as I said, actions speak louder than words. I cannot ethically as a person, not just as a Palestinian, but as a human being, I cannot support a government that has no problem donating and giving tens of billions of dollars towards the death of innocent children. I just can't do that. If you don't have the ethics to understand that that's wrong, it speaks to me about your ability to lead. And I cannot in good conscience, vote for the Democrats. They need to understand that this issue is a red line for a lot of people, and it's not just for Palestinians. It's anybody who cares about human life, who cares about decency and equality.
On that note, Washington, D.C. has seen a number of pro-Palestinian protests, and yet I also see, for example, Israeli flags in windows around your neighborhood. And I wonder, how do you feel when you see these? How do you now regard America, the country you call home?
I don't think it's shaken my faith in there are a lot of good people, and a lot of people who've understandably really put their careers on the line, their lives on the line for what's right. And I'm part of some very inspirational organizations that are multi-ethnic, multi-religious, incredibly meaneful ones that people who have nothing to do with the Palestinian, story, and they absolutely advocate. Some of the most vociferous supporters that I work with, are people of the Jewish faith, and it's very inspirational. As far as I haven't lost. I'm generally an optimistic person. Yes, this past year has been very difficult, but I think just as much as I've seen the ugliness come out, I've also seen the beauty and the people, the courage in people to support what's right.
What a lot of people have seen or consider as ugly is how those protesting for the Palestinian people have been treated by the governments, the militaries, the authorities. Tell me about your daughter Serene, who herself was trying to, now reached an age, late teens, as a young woman, trying to express her voice at a protest. What happened? Tell me.
So my daughter Serene has been really an inspiration for a lot of people. When she's in college, she's been trying to lead a lot of peaceful movements to bring light to the tragedies affecting her family, her own family. It's not just the Palestinian people, and she's done a lot of brilliant things at her university. And she one of the things she tried to do was to have a peaceful protest, and it was very she was a leader of this protest at her university. She organized it. She talked about very specific targeted goals, and she said that we were having this peaceful protest to specifically ask my university to, number one, to disclose, what funds our university is using that supports in any way the killing of Palestinian civilians and the occupation of the Palestinian people. She asked for them to divest from those companies, if that's the case, because it's unethical for the university to be supporting, companies that support violence and the killing of innocent people. She asked for the university to specifically call for a ceasefire. Very specific issues. She had a multi-ethnic, multicultural protest. People from all over the university. They were not just Palestinian. They were, people of all faiths, all religions. And they had this protest, and it went on all day. And I actually have video footage of this entire thing. They were dancing together, bringing signs. Very, very peaceful protest. And unfortunately, the governor of Virginia, released an edict and told the police that they needed to crack down as quickly as possible on these protests. And around 8 or 9 p.m., it's pretty, remarkable. It's something out of a movie. If you watch this video, police come up in these large vans with riot gear, tear gas. They lined up and essentially just, plowed through these protesters. And tear gassed them. My own daughter got punched in the face on video. She had to go to the emergency room. She was literally just standing her ground along with the other protesters, trying to just continue to raise awareness to the tragedy and the plight of the Palestinian people. And this was what resulted of it. Multiple protesters, not her, but multiple protesters that she worked with, ended up getting arrested, and were having to defend themselves over a peaceful protest. So it's been very difficult. It's affected us on multiple levels.
So, Dr. Haddad, your daughter Serene, who was punched at that peaceful protest by the police, is one of 5 children you have, ranging from early 20s to early teens. And I wonder how you manage their understanding of the situation, their expectations, how they can move forward, knowing what's been going on and considering the loss.
I always try to instill in them in a sense of, number one, I make it very clear to them that, this is about curing the injustice and equality for all people. I think it's very difficult for them when they see every day the injustice that's incurred by people, by Palestinians, both in their family in Gaza and also here. I mean, every one of them has encountered this in one way, shape, or form. The bullying in school for being Palestinian, my daughter, of course, my youngest son, it happens to all of them. And I think what we try to instill in them is a sense that, just advocate for what you know is right, and everything else will take care of itself. Don't sink to other people's level. Build collaborations with people who truly mean well and who also believe in equality for all people and justice for all people. And everything will work out, but you have to be positive, and you have to try to advocate for the equality. You can't just sit by passively and just expect everything to get better.
As we reflect on the anniversary of October the 7th, 2023, since the attacks on Hamas, I should say I spoke also to an Israeli man, a relatively young man, whose brother attended the Nova Music Festival, which was attacked. And he was abducted after seeing his wife killed. The shelter in which they hid was sprayed with bullets and a grenade was thrown in. Their 3-year-old son is now being looked after their grandparents. And while he hates the people he holds responsible, it was interesting to hear him saying that he still hopes of living in peace with Palestinian people. And despite the unimaginable horrors that you and your family have held, what's your view on that? Do you see any kind of common bond between the innocent people on both sides who've been affected by this conflict?
I absolutely do. And the reason I do is because you see it every day. You see the collaboration between well-meaning people of the Jewish faith and Israelis and Palestinians and people who, and it happens every day. And you see this collaboration. I think there's a humanness in all of us that bonds us together. And I think, I can stand here and say that I can feel and empathize with the suffering of anybody. It doesn't matter. I don't represent just the Palestinian people. I think, the suffering of anybody, Israeli or Palestinian, is unnecessary. The problem here is that we don't recognize the big elephant in the room, which is, if you don't treat the injustice that's been happening for 75 years, the inequality, the apartheid, the unequal military laws and the unequal, ability to have access to water and food and all those things, you can't have that. Show me anywhere in the world in history where you've had this level of injustice and apartheid and there be peace, but I am, to answer your question, very optimistic because of the collaboration I already see. I can recount, to the story you mentioned about October 7th, somebody I know very well and I respect, Miko Peled, who's an Israeli, who's the son of an Israeli general. And, he had a person in his family, tragically, who was killed in a suicide bombing. And this was back, a couple of decades ago now. And his response to that, rather than turning to hatred, was to actually ask the right question, which was to say, what level of desperation have we caused the Palestinian people that somebody would be willing to lose their life, and kill somebody else because they've gotten to that level of desperation, and that led him to the Palestinian cause, and he's one of the most inspiring leaders now, trying to advocate for equality for Palestinians and Israelis.
Is it difficult, especially for your family in Gaza, not to hate the Israelis?
You know, one of the things that just honestly moves me to tears every time I think about it is just how inspirational the people in Gaza are. Because there's a Palestinian term that we use called sumud, which means, you know, resilience in the face of oppression. And you know, they show it every day. And you know, what I mean by that is nothing gets them down. I mean, the circumstances they live under, anywhere else in the world, if you erase the term Palestinian, you ask people to live under the conditions they live under, I don't think very few people in this world could live the way that they live. 4 hours of electricity, barely enough water to do anything, days without regular food, you know, inability to leave an area the size of a very, very small U.S. state, your whole childhood, and yet they live. They live, and they not just live. They refuse to be disappointed or let down. They try to live, and they try to have their kids live. There is so little hatred in the people that I know and all my family. I don't think the term, you know, the other side really comes up. They of course focus on the injustice, but they try their best to live through it, and they're unflappable. It makes everything we go through in the United States just seem like nothing compared to what they go through. It's inspirational.
And now the situation is such that more than 70% of the buildings to date in Gaza have been destroyed, reduced to rubble. The supplies and conditions are even worse than ever. What does your family have to look forward to if and when the conflict stops?
So, I mean, among my family, all my extended family, there's not a single person whose home is still up and intact. My family home that I grew up in, that I mentioned to you earlier, is completely destroyed. We have albums dating back to the Ottoman Empire. You know, I used to spend hours going through these albums of all my family, and you know, they've all been burned, they've all been destroyed. The house is down in rubble. Every single family member is living somewhere else, whether it's in a tent, you know, or somebody's home. You know, there's not a single person who has any regular place to live. Having said that, again, the sumud that I mentioned, people, they love their land, they love their people, they love, you know, they love that where they live, and they love everything about it. And it's not the physical, it's, you know, it's the emotional. And I think they will rebuild, and I have no doubt in my mind they will rebuild, and they will be even stronger, because that's just the kind of people that we are.
There are those who believe that Israel's goal is to shift everyone out of Gaza, that they have ambitions on the territory. Would your family ever consider leaving?
I don't think so. I mean, most of my family would never, you know, leave permanently. They adore and love their land way too much.
Even if and when this ceasefire does take place, there is no turning the clock back, considering what has happened. How do you move forward emotionally, psychologically now, and get to the next phase past all this? Is it possible even?
I mean, I think that the way to get past it is the ceasefire is like sort of, you know, peanuts compared to the underlying issues. You know, nothing will get better until the blockade on Gaza is over, and people can actually get, you know, you have to remember that the water and the electricity was all controlled by the Israeli authorities. So it's not like we have any access to it without it's shut off, shut on. And so, you know, the conditions that lead to the injustice have to improve. Water has to be allowed in. Electricity has to be allowed in. People in all of Palestine, in all of the Palestinian territories, in the West Bank and Gaza, they have to be allowed to live as equal citizens, equal people. And until that happens, you know, none of this will get better. You know, you have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people in the West Bank getting killed. You know, what does that have to do with Gaza? Why are they getting killed? Why are settlers killing Palestinian civilians in the West Bank? It's part of the overall occupation, the apartheid, the injustice. And that to answer your question, that's what has to be fought by the international community. In this day and age, it is unacceptable in the international community in this day and age, in 2024, for the world to support an apartheid system. And it's just not acceptable. And I think when the world wakes up to that, this will get better.
Dr. Tariq Haddad, thank you for taking the time to tell your story.
Thank you.
Thank you. Almog Levy celebrated his third birthday with his family this summer, although celebrated is actually not the best word to describe the occasion. As so often since October the 7th, he asked where his mum and dad were, and he asked when they would be coming home. But on that fateful day last October, his mother, Anyav, was killed, and his father, Or, taken hostage by Hamas gunmen as they hid in a shelter at the Supernova Music Festival. Almog's uncle Michael has committed his life to securing the release of his younger brother, Or, and he joins me now in Washington. Michael, thank you for making the time. Now, I'd like to talk about your nephew, Almog, or Mogi as he's known, in just a little while. But tell me first about his parents, your brother, Or. Paint a picture of them for me.
I guess you can call them the perfect couple. They used to be the perfect couple. They met about 15 years ago. At first, they were very good friends, part of the same group of friends. Einav even had a different boyfriend when they met. And then they became friends, and they started hanging out together all the time. And after a while, we all knew that date's about to happen. My mother actually asked him, "Oh, why don't you date Einav?" And he just told her, "No, I can't date Einav. She's like my sister." And then a few months after, they started dating, and from that day on, they were never apart. They loved traveling, they loved music festival. Well, kind of like the new Israeli dream.
And that's the interesting thing. You've always described them as soulmates. You said that Niav was like or soulmates.
Exactly. I mean, she was his whole life. They did everything together. They went to music festivals together. They traveled the world together. They were never apart, like I said.
Having known each other that long and being so close, what was it like when little Mogi came along and suddenly they were parents?
At first we thought it will change things, but they actually did the same things just with him this time. They flew everywhere with him. They were, I think, like a few months before October 7th, they went to Thailand with him. They had a lot of fun together.
So before that fateful day, October the 7th, it literally was all flowing very, very nicely then.
Yeah, it was like a dream, I think.
Then, of course, everything changed the next day. They'd headed to that Supernova Music Festival. And as with many things in life, timing can prove to be, quite tragic. How did the events, from what you know of everything, how did the events unfold for Einav and Or?
They actually got to the Supernova Festival at 6:20 a.m. It was 9 minutes before the attack started. And from what I know, they immediately ran from the area. They all actually texted my mother that they are heading back. But from what I know now, they wanted to turn left, which is the way to their home. But the road was closed, so they had to turn right and drive south. Then they had to run into a bomb shelter because of the missile attack. And from that day, that second on, everything went crazy. They got into this bomb shelter, squeezed in together with 27 others. I'm not sure if you saw those bomb shelters, but it's basically a bus stop made out of concrete with not even a door. It's a tiny one. From inside, I called my mother. It was 7:39 a.m. Completely terrified. He just repeated the sentence, "Mom, you don't want to know what's going on here." And 10 minutes after, the terrorists arrived to that bomb shelter and sprayed it with bullets, with grenades. They even fired an RPG into it. And he had to watch Einav being murdered in front of him, together with 17 others, before he was abducted.
It's hard to imagine how chaotic things were. How long did it take you to find out, you and your family, to find out exactly what had happened to them?
It took us a while. At first, I wasn't too worried because, unfortunately, in Israel, we are used to those missile attacks. So I kept telling myself, okay, they will be fine. It's just a missile attack. They will hide in a bomb shelter and then head back. And my mother actually called me it was around 8:30 or so. She was crying. She told me that she was worried and she doesn't know what happened and that doesn't answer the phone. I was actually angry. I told her, "Mom, you're just thinking bad things. We'll stop thinking about the worst because the lines probably fell or something like that, and he will call us very soon." And only at 10:15, I got a call from my uncle. He asked me if I know what happened to all, or if we heard something from him. And I told them that they should be on their way back, but I'm not sure. That second on, I knew that something really bad happened.
It sounds like, you're so used to that, living in that way, that you tend to remain optimistic, which is interesting.
I think that's kind of how I try to see everything. I try to be as optimistic as possible because you have too many reasons to be pessimistic in Israel.
Now, seeing that video of the attack on that shelter and Or's capture must have been pretty difficult, obviously. But you want the world to see that video. Why is that? Why do you want it to be so public?
It took us a while to decide we want to release it and to show it to the world. But the way I see it is that sometimes the world need a reminder. People need a reminder that there are actually live hostages in Gaza. And I know it's really easy to forget about them, but it's about them. It's not about politics or the war or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's about human beings.
It's very difficult to imagine what this last year would have been like for you. I mean, it's gone on way longer than most people could have imagined. And I'm wondering, emotionally, how trapped you feel in that moment because things haven't moved on after so long.
So I keep saying that people ask me, what are you going to do on October 7th? Or how do you intend to mention it? For me, it's just another day because I still live in October 7th, 2023. Things were stuck there for me. Everything feels like one long day.
Have you become a community with other family members of the hostages? I mean, how does that help you cope? Obviously, if you do get together, it's a support structure. How have you found that coming together?
That's actually one of the positive things that happened because of it. They became my family. I can talk to them. They understand me with no words sometimes. And it's helping.
And yet, the difficulty is that all of you, the families of those waiting, you've had to deal with news. Either you hope for news of release or you have the tragic news, as was the case with the bodies that were found.
Yeah, it's terrible. Sometimes when they are getting released, it's the happiest day you can imagine. And sometimes when we hear horrible news like the 6 that were executed, that's the most horrific news you can think of. So in a way, it's like an emotional roller coaster. But the amazing thing is that we stay together. Even the families that got the worst announcement stayed with us, and they keep fighting with us, and that's amazing to see.
Conflicts they have tragedy on both sides quite often. And as you try to cope, and you and the families of the hostages try to cope with the situation on your side, how easy or difficult is it for you to see what's happening on the other side? That, you know, suffering obviously some of the Palestinians are going through, many Palestinians are going through.
I hate to see anyone suffer, and I keep saying it everywhere, that Hamas didn't just do it to us as Israelis. They did it to his own people. The Palestinians are suffering because of Hamas. And the fact that Hamas is still there means that everyone will keep suffering. And like I said, I hate to see anyone suffer. And I would love to live in peace together with Palestinians, if possible. And the only way to do it is to release the hostages, and this will end the war. And that's what I think that the world should do. Push towards this.
One of the issues, Michael, is that often a conflict like this just gets seen through the political lens. And I wonder, when you see it being pushed into that political lens, how you worry about the other aspects. I mean, for you, how much is it political?
For me, it's not related to politics in any way. You know, obviously, I'm not naive. I know the solution has to be through politics somehow, but people has to remember that those are human beings. All is a real human being. The rest of the hostages are real human beings with families and hopes and dreams and plans for the future, just like you and I. And although it's very easy to take it into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's not about it. It's about human lives. It's about people who just wanted to go and celebrate in a music festival, and people who were kidnapped from their beds. This is not war. They didn't want to fight anyone. We all want to live in peace. Most of the hostages are actually peace activists. I want to live in peace with the Palestinians. I don't hate anyone. I just need my brother back and the rest of the hostages back, and hopefully we can find a way to live together and in peace.
And you've advocated tirelessly for the release of the hostages, including your brother, and you reached out to some fairly prominent people. What's been the response? Who have you reached out to, and how have they responded?
Sometimes I don't even remember, because I've met so many influential people, but just to name a few, I've met the Pope, I've met presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers of any country you can imagine. The response is usually very sympathetic. They show solidarity. Sometimes they even do things behind the scenes or publicly. Honestly, I don't care, as long as they are doing something to help and to end the suffering for both sides. I'm fine with it. If they can help me get my brother and the rest of the hostages back, I'm fine with any kind of response from them.
Do you worry to some degree that perhaps all these people you are meeting, that the politicians are so wrapped up with their own stuff that you're being paid a lot of lip service, that more could be done?
The fact that they are still there means that we all can do more. You know, me personally, the politicians, the media, all of us. So yeah, sometimes I meet people and I know that nothing is going to come up out of it, but I just keep doing it, because you never know who will be the one who will make the change or be able to help.
We're talking here in Washington, D.C., the heart of U.S. politics. And I wondered whether you feel that the U.S. policy on the Israel-Gaza conflict is helping or hindering the situation when it comes to releasing the hostages.
Honestly, I don't know what's the right way. I don't know what other families should do. I don't know what politicians should do. I try to wake up every morning and tell myself, ask myself what I should do now. For me, the fact that the hostages are on the agenda means that the world haven't forgotten. And like I said earlier, the only way to solve the issues in the Middle East starts with releasing the hostages. Everything else will happen only when they are released. So this is what I want, and this is what we are calling for.
It feels kind of frozen to you then, the way things are.
I guess. I mean, we don't hear anything about negotiations right now, so it is, but we'll change it.
Now, I understand you've been disappointed by the fact that some of the human rights organizations that are out there haven't been able to help you. Explain to me what happened with that.
In short, nothing. They didn't meet the hostages. They didn't pass medicine. They didn't even meet them. We expected a lot more. We expected them to at least see them and make sure that they are treated. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. I'm talking about all of them. The Red Cross, all the organizations of the UN, none of them did anything.
Is it possible that perhaps they don't have the ability or access because of the way the conflict has been going? I mean, is the military action, for example, in Gaza perhaps even hindering the chance for them to do that?
I don't believe so, because they have connections. They have people inside Gaza. And from the discussions we had, for example, with the Red Cross, they prefer to preserve the connections with Hamas and not to hurt them. And in a way, they give up on seeing what's going on with the hostages in order to keep those connections with Hamas.
Now, it's interesting because you're saying that connection that they want with Hamas, you're also saying, and you have said, that Hamas has to go. And in the aftermath of October the 7th, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually even said he was determined to wipe out Hamas. Now, I wonder, do you feel you fully understand that? I mean, do you fully understand and support that approach, or do you think it might actually be a hindrance to progressing the release of the hostages?
Oh, I think that the way or the order of things should be the opposite. If you ask any normal human being on the street, they understand that Hamas is a terror organization. They didn't just murder Israelis. They murdered Muslims. They murdered a Muslim guy outside of my brother's bomb shelter because he tried to save the others. He spoke to them in Arabic. He told them he was religious, and they just abused him and executed him, basically. So they have to go in order for the Palestinians to have a chance for a normal life. They have to go, but we can get the hostages first and then finish the job with Hamas and make them go for the sake of everyone in the Middle East.
That's what I was wondering, is whether it's a case of the Prime Minister of Israel, continuing with this military action at the cost of the hostages.
I don't see it the same way, because unfortunately, we have experience with hostages in Gaza for more than 10 years now, with no military action. They didn't come back. The Hamas didn't want to negotiate anything about them. So they have to feel some kind of a military pressure. But yes, I agree that after a certain point, Israel has to get to a deal. And that's what we're calling for.
I'm wondering, when you saw thousands of people coming out on the streets and demanding a ceasefire, whether you felt this might be a chance then of a change in the policy that would allow the hostages to be released.
Yeah, we felt supported. And those hundreds of thousands there on the streets demanded to get back all the hostages before it's too late. And that's what, like I said, that's what we're calling for.
How do you think Israel's new focus on Hezbollah now will affect the chance of getting Or and the other hostages released?
I think that everything is connected. And Hezbollah is a completely different issue, and it should be solved. But once again, that's part of the bigger picture. If the hostages are back, everything can be solved. The conflict with Hezbollah, the conflict with Hamas. Basically everything that's going on the Middle East can start recovering only after they are back.
Is it a bit of a catch-22 though, Michael? Because what you have now is you have the Houthis, you have Hezbollah, and then of course Hamas continuing its actions. And those others, Hezbollah, Houthis, they're trying to support Hamas because of the military action taking place. So it's almost like without any kind of ceasefire, everything is stuck.
Yes, but I think that people tend to forget that behind everything is Iran. They are financing all of them. They are financing Hezbollah, they are financing the Houthis, they are financing Hamas, obviously. So everything is connected. But to your question, yeah, I agree. There has to be a ceasefire, but before we can get to a ceasefire, we need the hostages back. The order of the things should be the other way around.
So if Prime Minister Netanyahu was sitting in this room with us, what would you ask him to do?
Very simple. Get to a deal. Seal a deal. Get the hostages back and then do whatever you need to do with Hamas or Hezbollah or everyone else.
Let's get back to your little nephew, Almog. How has he coped with the past 12 months? Because it's been almost a year since, he's had a hug from his parents or had any kind of contact. I mean, I know it's difficult, but do you do your best to keep the memories of Or and his mum alive, or are you kind of trying to shelter him a little bit so he doesn't feel the depth of that loss?
Oh, it's very tricky because on one hand, we want him to remember, we want him to know who was his mom. We want him to remember all and know that all is there and he will be back and he is his father. So on one hand, we tell him stories, we show him pictures, we show him videos, but on the other hand, we don't want to deal with it too much because obviously he misses them. He wants to see them. He wants to meet them again. Unfortunately, it's not possible with his mom, and we're still fighting to get his father back.
And it's even more tricky because, as the time goes on, you're passing birthdays and anniversaries. Again, how do you treat those?
Those milestones are I think those are the hardest. He celebrated his birthday alone. We threw him a big party to make him happy, and he was happy. For us, it was one of the saddest days of our lives. But we try to keep him happy and try to treat him like a normal kid. But obviously, those milestones that are important in every parent's life are without his parents.
Talking of anniversaries, you said something very poignant a little while ago. You said October the 7th is coming round again, first year anniversary, but for you it's just another day. I wonder though, do you think there's any chance that when people do have to remember that date as it comes around, that it might create more impetus, more movement for something to be done? Because people now will say it has been a year and there hasn't been a resolution.
Now, obviously, this date is symbolic, and yes, we can and need to use it in order to remind people that there's still no solution, that there are still 101 hostages in Gaza. So, for me personally, it doesn't mean anything. It's just another day, but it is a day that we can use the media attention to remind the world that there are still hostages back in Gaza.
Mike, sitting with you, I can sense, obviously, the depth of the emotion. It's your brother who's been taken hostage. You've lost your sister-in-law, who's his soulmate, and you're now dealing with, looking after his 3-year-old son. Is there any time that you find it so much, the pressure to be so much, that you fear that this will never resolve positively, that you might not see Or again? How do you avoid getting into that kind of depth?
Obviously, this is somewhere inside my head all the time, but I try not to think about it because for me there's no other way than him being back. I won't let this amazing boy to grow up without a father, and I promised my parents actually on the second day that I'll bring him back. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'll bring him back.
Now, we know that some of the hostages have been able to see news coverage from time to time, so trying to take a positive approach on this with the chance that, might have a chance to see this interview, might have a chance to see what's going on. What message could you send to him now?
It's very simple. I try to approach him from time to time. I want him to know that we are looking up for Almog. We'll keep him happy. And I want him to stay strong and know that we are doing everything to bring him back, and that we'll bring him back.
Is there anything you could say to his captors?
I don't waste my time on those monsters. Those are not even human to me.
Well, Michael, I wish you luck getting your brother back, and thank you for making the time to talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.